Hello and welcome. What we're going to be looking at today is, before we get into the actual real detail of the three branches of government later on for this course, we're going to do a brief overview of what the three branches have the ability of doing within our government. So the American Constitution outlines a three-branch government, which was a departure from the one-branch system in the Articles of Confederation. If you remember back to our conversation in the Articles of Confederation, there really is a unitary government in the United States in which all 13 states have to agree on legislation in order for something to pass. So we see a great departure from that when we have the creation of the Constitution. So the three branches that are created within the Constitution are the legislative branch, which we have a bicameral legislative branch in which we have a Senate and House of Representatives. We have an executive branch, and we have a judicial branch. The legislative branch is made up of two houses, so like we said, it's bicameral. The Senate is the senior or more prestigious house. There are 2 senators for each state. One of the things that we'll look at in the next unit is that in order to be a senator, you have to be 30 years old. You have to be able to be a resident of the United States and a citizen of the United States. You have to be a resident of the state in which you are running for senator, and you get to serve a 6-year term. And then the House of Representatives is the junior house, and representation is determined by the population of each state. So depending on how big the state is, that's going to determine how many representatives they get of the 435 representatives for the House. To be a representative, you've got to be 25 years old. You've got to be a resident of the district in which you plan on representing. You have to be a United States citizen, and those are the main characteristics of that. So what are the things that the legislature can do? So we have a variety of expressed and enumerated powers that exist within the Constitution. 5 deal with economic legislation. So we've got the idea of taxes. The federal government has the ability to tax you. They have the ability to borrow money. They have the ability to regulate commerce. This is known as the Commerce Clause. This is both commerce that exists with other countries as well as interstate commerce. They have the power to coin money, and they have the power to punish counterfeiting. So as you see, some of the things that we have here are very much in contrast to the types of rights that the government existed under the Articles of Confederation. 7 of the express powers deal with providing defense. So the government gets to punish piracies. They get to declare war, which is something that a lot of times is attributed to the President of the United States, but that's not a power in which he possesses. They get to raise and support armed forces. They get to call forth the militia, and they get to organize the militia. There are also 5 other concepts that exist. One is the idea of naturalizing citizens. So the Congress gets to determine what are the rules and regulations for allowing immigrants into the United States. So once again, something that is largely attributed to the president is something that they have the power to look at. The idea of how people become citizens is largely a congressional concept. You have the idea of establishing post offices, securing patents and copyrights. Patents are granted to those who invent products, and copyrights are granted to those who create some sort of intellectual property or write a book or something of that nature. They have the ability to establish the courts, and they get to govern the District of Columbia. The final expressed concept is the idea of the elastic clause, which states that in order for Congress to be able to do any of these powers, they have the right to do anything that is needed in order to make sure that those things take place. And one of the things that's largely lost in American government is the role of Congress. Congress is supposed to be the focal point of American government. They are the ones that are really largely given the most power, and they have the ability to have the most influence as far as what takes place with policy in the United States. The legislative branch's primary goal is to pass laws. So then we've got the executive branch. The president has broad but vague powers, and what the Constitution really says is the executive shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. The main role of the president is to faithfully execute the laws passed through the legislature. The position was created due to the weaknesses inherent in the Articles of Confederation. So what are the powers of the executive? One is that they're the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and state militias. So the president really does have the power to be able to put armed forces where they see they're needed. They get to appoint, with approval, heads of executive departments. They may pardon people of convicted federal crimes. They make treaties with, once again, the consent of the Senate. They appoint ambassadors, federal judges, and other top officials with the consent of the Senate. So if you notice, pretty much anything that the president appoints, they have to have Congress approve that, especially the Senate. They deliver an annual State of the Union address, which is always done in person now, but they aren't even required to formally provide that address verbally. Jefferson is actually famous for writing his State of the Union addresses and then sending them to Congress. They get to meet with heads of state, ambassadors, and other foreign officials. They get to commission military officers, and they ensure that the laws of Congress that are passed are faithfully executed. And then we have the judicial branch. There are two different court systems in the United States. One system consists of the federal courts, whose powers are derived from the Constitution and federal law. The second includes the courts from each of the 50 states, whose powers derive from state law and constitutions. So state courts are always going to hear issues about state law, and federal courts are always going to hear issues about federal law. Then we've got the idea of the unwritten Constitution. The unwritten Constitution consists of the traditions, precedents, and practices that are incorporated into our form of government that add to the Constitution's elasticity and viability. So really what that means is that there are a lot of things that take place within American government that aren't necessarily written down in the Constitution, but are recognized as being everyday concepts. One is the idea of political parties. Political parties exist and we use them, and they are a very integral part of how we work our government. But there's nothing in the Constitution that states that we have to have political parties. In fact, George Washington even went so far as to say that we should stay away from these parties because it would be the downfall of American government. The President's Cabinet exists, but that is something that is not dictated by the Constitution. We also have political action committees, which are organizations that push for certain concepts and they push for certain candidates. There's nothing in the Constitution about these. And then we have the federal bureaucracy, which are the organizations that generally enforce the laws in the United States. And these are something that exist also without constitutional concept. Here are all the different checks and balances that exist within the government as well.